Last week, inquisitive journalists at The Intercept published a bombshell article about social media censorship which took the internet by storm. That's because the article is based on leaked and litigated documents which prove that the US Department of Homeland Security is working hand in hand with big tech to police information online. Today, I'm going to summarize this important article, explain what it says in simple terms, and tell you why decentralized social media might be the only solution. The article I'll be summarizing today is titled, quote, "Truth Cops. Leaked documents outline DHS's plans to police disinformation," and it was written by Ken Klippenstein and Li Fang. I'll leave a link to the full article in the description if you're interested, and I do suggest you give it a read if you have the time. Now, the authors begin by explaining that all the information in the article is based on, quote, "years of internal DHS memos, emails, and documents obtained via leaks and an ongoing lawsuit, as well as public documents." This information proves the US government is actively policing information online. The authors go on to explain that Uncle Sam's online influence became apparent to the average person when the DHS announced the infamous Disinformation Governance Board earlier this year. This so-called Ministry of Truth was shut down shortly afterwards due to the predictably terrible optics. On that note, some of you may recall that the Disinformation Governance Board was announced right after Elon Musk announced he would be acquiring Twitter. The European Union also announced its own censorship push with the Digital Services Act, which will set up a Ministry of Truth in every EU country. The authors then reveal that, although the Disinformation Governance Board was decommissioned, the DHS is actively exploring, quote, "other initiatives to police social media." The authors assert that the DHS's expansion to social media is due to the end of the department's original mandate to fight terrorism. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, the DHS is working hand in hand with big tech companies to influence discourse on social media. The extent of the department's influence was revealed in an ongoing lawsuit against the DHS by a Republican politician. In the author's words, quote, "Discussions have ranged from the scale and scope of government intervention in online discourse to the mechanics of streamlining takedown requests for false or intentionally misleading information." Now, this reminds me, you should know there is a difference between disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. Earlier in the article, the authors explained that, quote, "misinformation is false information spread unintentionally. Disinformation is false information spread intentionally. And malinformation is factual information shared, typically out of context, with harmful intent." Now, I reckon you can lump all of these into a single category for the sake of simplicity. Anything the government doesn't like. In all seriousness, the authors then provide an eye-popping text message from a Microsoft executive to a DHS director. Quote, "Platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Note that Microsoft owns Skype and LinkedIn." The authors also provide a highlight from a recent meeting that an FBI official had with executives from Twitter and megabank JP Morgan Chase about distrust in the US government on social media. Quote, "We need a media infrastructure that is held accountable." To add insult to injury, a Twitter spokesperson told the authors of the article that they make content moderation decisions, quote, "independently and do not coordinate with other entities," when they were asked about this meeting. What's crazy is that the authors managed to find a special Facebook portal for intelligence agencies and law enforcement where they can make content moderation requests. Obviously, both Facebook and the FBI declined to comment, despite the fact that the portal was still live when the article was published. Now, that might have something to do with the fact that Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg was asked about Facebook's censorship policies by Joe Rogan on his podcast. If you listen to that episode, you'll know that Mark admitted Facebook was contacted by the FBI, but didn't really confirm a censorship request. In the second part of the article, the authors pivot to discussing when all this social media censorship started happening. They identify the 2016 presidential election as the starting point, which makes sense given that this is the same time that all those fact-checking companies started to crawl out of the woodwork. Not surprisingly, it was the pandemic that supercharged the DHS's social media censorship. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that many of the theories that the DHS and its army of fact-checkers labelled as conspiracies ended up being correct in the end. Some are still coming true. But the DHS's censorship is not over. According to a DHS report obtained by the authors, its priorities for the coming year will be to fight, quote, inaccurate information on a wide range of topics, including, quote, the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of medical procedures, racial justice, US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of US support to Ukraine. The authors focus on the US withdrawal from Afghanistan as being a particular point of contention. To refresh your memory, the US suddenly withdrew from Afghanistan last summer after spending trillions of dollars and thousands of lives fighting the Taliban. The Taliban took over shortly after the withdrawal. The Republican Party had vowed to investigate the withdrawal from Afghanistan if they took sufficient political control during the midterms, though the results of those now leave this looking less likely. That said, such a probe is still possible, and this ties into an excellent quote from the authors. Quote, how disinformation is defined by the government has not been clearly articulated, and the inherently subjective nature of what constitutes disinformation provides a broad opening for DHS officials to make politically motivated determinations about what constitutes dangerous speech. Newsflash: this is why so many people are concerned about the idea of policing hate speech. Whoever defines what counts as hate speech will have the power to censor whoever they want. This seems to be fine with the EU, which will police hate speech as part of the Digital Services Act I mentioned earlier. Funnily enough, the DHS is justifying its new quest by claiming that terrorism is, quote, exacerbated by misinformation and disinformation spread online. The authors accurately point out that this is nothing more than an excuse for political propaganda and point to half a dozen previous examples as proof. The authors go on to admit that the extent to which the DHS affects the social media feeds of the average American is unclear. They explain that intelligence agencies flagged over 4,800 social media posts during the 2020 election, and 35% of them were subsequently suppressed or censored by social media. What's interesting is that this statistic comes from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, which, along with the FBI, met with social media platforms every month prior to the 2020 election. The long list includes Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Discord, LinkedIn, and even Wikipedia. Even Wikipedia. Let that sink in. Not in the Elon way, but the actual way. Jokes aside, the authors reveal that these monthly meetings between social media platforms and intelligence agencies are still ongoing. They explain that this private-public partnership was cemented back in 2018 with a law passed by former US President Donald Trump, which created a new wing of the DHS that included the CISA. This new wing focused on social media disinformation, and it was highly active in policing disinformation during the 2020 election. Now, if I understand correctly, the new wing's bi-weekly meetings were supposed to end after the 2020 election, but they continue to take place to this day. Emails and meeting notes between the DHS, Twitter, and CISA obtained by the authors reveal that, leading up to the 2020 election, quote, state election officials sent examples of potential forms of disinformation to CISA, which would then forward them on to social media companies for a response. And last year, the CISA replaced its new wing, formerly known as the Countering Foreign Influence Task Force, with the Misinformation, Disinformation and Malinformation Team, or MDM for short. The MDM's job is to, quote, counter all types of disinformation. In other words, a task force intended to combat election disinformation expanded its scope to include whatever information the government deems to be disinformation, regardless of whether it's related to an election or not. Case in point, Jen Easterly, the director of CISA appointed by the current US president, remarked late last year that, quote, we're in the business of critical infrastructure, and the most critical infrastructure is our cognitive infrastructure, so building that resilience to misinformation and disinformation, I think, is incredibly important. And so CISA's scope has expanded. Now, the authors give the example of the DHS's concerns about disinformation relating to 5G technology. I bring this up because it's the same thing that AFP Fact Check mentioned in their first video about disinformation, and AFP Fact Check recently fact-checked my meme. More about that in the description. I digress. The authors then reveal something spooky. Quote, in late February, Easterly texted with Matthew Masterson, a representative at Microsoft who formerly worked at CISA, that she is, quote, trying to get us in a place where Fed can work with platforms to better understand mis/dis trends so relevant agencies can try to pre-bunk/debunk as useful. Now, I am by no means an expert in internet slang or government speak, but I'm pretty sure pre-bunk means preventing information from getting out in the first place. Put differently, pre-bunk means proactive censorship, and that's something which should scare you regardless of your politics. If that wasn't scary enough, Twitter's recently fired head of legal policy, trust and safety, Vijaya Gadde, is revealed by the authors as being part of an advisory committee to CISA. For context, Vijaya was colloquially referred to as Twitter's chief censor due to the controversial content policies she proposed. The authors revealed that the CISA Advisory Committee was concerned about information that undermines, quote, key democratic institutions such as the courts, or by other sectors such as the financial system or public health measures. Let me repeat, creating distrust in the current financial system is verboten. What's even scarier, though, is that this same CISA Advisory Committee issued a report calling on the agency to, quote, closely monitor social media platforms of all sizes, mainstream media, cable news, hyper-partisan media, talk radio, and other online resources. Did I mention that a Twitter exec was involved? And as a poisonous cherry on top, a top CISA official recommended the agency, quote, recommended the use of third-party information-sharing non-profits as a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda, effectively confirming that this is all government propaganda. Now that is heavy, and we're only halfway through the article. Speaking of which, the authors bring their analysis back to the start of the article with the disbanded Disinformation Governance Board, aka the Ministry of Truth. They provide an amazing quote from a Politico author who was critical of the new DHS subsidiary. Quote, our government produces lies and disinformation at industrial scale and always has. It overclassifies vital information to block its own citizens from becoming any the wiser. It pays thousands of press aides to play hide the salami with facts. Now, an official from the DHS initially tried to counter the critics by explaining that the ministry's purpose is to, quote, actually develop guidelines, standards, guardrails to ensure that the work that has been ongoing for nearly 10 years does not infringe on people's free speech rights, rights of privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. Well, not a single soul was convinced, probably not even the official himself. Unfortunately, the authors reveal that the DHS's censorship efforts have only expanded since the Ministry of Truth was disbanded. They talk about how sub-agencies like the Customs and Border Protection are somehow responsible for determining whether information on social media is accurate. Meanwhile, sub-agencies like the Science and Technology Directorate get the final say on whether you're a bot or a human. Pro tip: if you say anything that goes against the mainstream media narrative, you are automatically a bot, at least according to these guys. Probably. As expected, the DHS's online efforts are becoming so significant that they are slowly starting to eclipse the agency's original purpose of fighting terrorism. Now, this was revealed in an internal report obtained by the authors, which includes, quote, domestic violent extremists as the DHS's primary targets. Pro tip: if you push back against the government in any way, you are one of them, at least according to these guys. Probably. Now, to accomplish its new goals, the DHS will work closely with NGOs to, quote, build resilience to the impacts of false information. This begs the question of who is funding all the NGOs that are getting ever more involved in the affairs of the average person. I'll leave it to you to look that up. The authors then go back even further in time by talking about how social media companies were initially reluctant to comply with the DHS's requests to monitor the social media accounts of terrorists in the early 2000s. It's safe to say that the slippery slope is very real here, and it's one that's tailor-made. That's because the authors note, quote, intelligence agencies backed new startups designed to monitor the vast flow of information across social networks to better understand emerging narratives and risks. Now, this immediately reminded me of how some blockchain analytics companies got their funding. More about how they're tracking every single one of your crypto transactions using the link in the description. Now, what is truly insane is the DHS is apparently not even authorized to operate. The Senate Homeland Security Committee warned in 2018 that, quote, the department has not been fully reauthorized since its inception over 15 years ago. And, quote, as the threat landscape continues to evolve, the department adjusted its organization and activities to address emerging threats and protect the US homeland. This evolution of the department's duties and organization, including the structure and operations of the DHS headquarters, has never been codified in statute. The FBI, on the other hand, does have all the bells and whistles it needs to operate, and you'll recall that it's been involved in social media censorship too. Like the DHS, the FBI's disinformation quest has its roots in the 2016 election, with the subsequent formation of the Foreign Influence Task Force. Per DHS documents, the FBI's task force focuses on, quote, subversiving data utilized to drive a wedge between the populace and the government. The authors also reveal that they interviewed an FBI agent who was reassigned from countering foreign intelligence to domestic social media censorship. The authors reiterate that this is something that has been occurring under the previous and current US administrations, and give examples to that end. The main takeaway is that the suppression and censorship of information on social media by the US government has only continued to increase. Amazingly, the authors managed to get an interview with another FBI official who confirmed that, quote, they work on an undercover basis online to penetrate social networking chat rooms, online forums and blogs to detect, enter, dismantle and disrupt existing and emerging terrorist organizations via online forums, chat rooms, bulletin boards, blogs, websites and social networking. The worst part is that what the FBI is doing is apparently legal. That's because the agency is allowed to do all of the above so long as it is part of an ongoing investigation. And the FBI is still allowed to analyze social media even if there is no ongoing investigation, which is truly wild. Now note that I'm leaving out the last part of the article for the sake of time, so be sure to read that part when you're done with this video. This brings me to the big question, and that's whether decentralized social media is the only solution to all this censorship of online information. In short, yes, but replacing centralized social media with decentralized social media is not going to be easy, and not just because of adoption hurdles. That's because for a decentralized social media platform to work, you need a smart contract cryptocurrency that's decentralized, scalable, and secure. Now, those of you who are familiar with the blockchain trilemma will know that it's not possible for a cryptocurrency to have all three qualities. The thing about decentralized social media is that extreme scalability is required to support the billions of existing users on platforms like Meta and Instagram. This is why some decentralized social media projects like Lens Protocol are building their platforms on Layer 2 scaling solutions such as Polygon. The problem there is that many Layer 2 scaling solutions are actually quite centralized. In Polygon's case, the smart contracts that connect to the Ethereum blockchain are controlled by just a handful of multi-sig wallets, and Polygon's incredible speed is due to it having just 7 to 10 block producers on its Bohr layer. In theory, a regulator could coerce the key holders to Polygon's multisigs to censor a social media protocol on Polygon. Now, this sounds outlandish until you realize that Ethereum itself is slowly succumbing to on-chain censorship. Thankfully, Ethereum's updated roadmap seeks to combat this censorship, and you can find out more about that in a recent Clips video. As a quick aside, it wouldn't surprise me at all if censorship resistance is the real reason why the SEC is going after Library, a crypto project which powers Odyssey, a decentralized alternative to YouTube. Now, I have no concrete evidence for this, but the insanity of the Intercept report leads me to believe it's likely. Now, in practice, the bigger issue with rolling out a decentralized social media protocol is that the absence of censorship could mean it's less likely to receive institutional investment. That's because institutions wouldn't support a decentralized social media platform that contained illegal content. Consider the case of Theta, a crypto project that focuses on decentralized streaming. Any video content on Theta's Edgecast cannot be taken down, and I suspect this is why the project has flown under the radar of institutions despite its impressive tech. The institutions want some level of censorship. So, the question then becomes how much censorship should be tolerated on a decentralized social media platform, and who gets to decide what gets censored. Lens Protocol's approach is to make it possible to create different front ends for the same content to allow for different kinds of content moderation. This is amazing, but it brings us back to the issue of decentralization, scalability, and security, which probably won't be solved anytime soon. That said, a decentralized social media platform built on a decentralized Polkadot parachain could come close to providing a solution, and you can find out more about Polkadot using the link in the description. And that is all for today's video about social media censorship. If you found it informative, smash that like button to let me know. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next video, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell before you go. While you wait for the next video to hit the tube, here's what you can do. Check out Coin Bureau Clips for more content like this, or tune in to the Coin Bureau podcast to get crypto knowledge that will last. You can also follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for memes and behind the scenes, and join my Telegram channel for daily crypto updates that will keep you up to speed. If you're wondering what cryptos I hold as part of my portfolio, subscribe to my weekly newsletter to know. And if you want to support what we do, head on over to the Coin Bureau merch store and get yourself some comfy crypto merch that suits you. Links to all these resources and more will be down in the description. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Till then, stay cool, stay safe, and stay crypto.